I am Candy, and I just turned 32 last month. 2 years ago, I sat at my parents' dining table and watched them hand my brother Jack a check for $230,000 for his new house. That same night, I overheard my father tell my mother, "At least one of our children isn't a failure." I walked out, deleted their contacts, and stopped calling. 2 years of silence passed until last week, when my brother drove past my new 40-acre property and immediately called our father, screaming, "You need to see what Candy has built. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button before I reveal how I secretly built my success while my family thought I was wasting my potential." Growing up in Lake Forest, an affluent suburb north of Chicago, our family looked perfect from the outside. Our two-story colonial home with its manicured lawn and three-car garage represented everything my parents valued: status appearances and financial success. My father, Michael Henderson, built his career as an investment banker, working 60-hour weeks and measuring his worth by the size of his year-end bonuses. My mother, Diane, embraced her role as the quintessential socialite, organizing charity galas and country club luncheons while carefully maintaining our family's image in the community. From my earliest memories, the difference in how my parents treated my brother Jack and me was subtle but unmistakable. Jack. 3 years, my senior, was their golden child, the son who would carry on the family name and follow in our father's financially successful footsteps. When Jack showed interest in baseball at age 8, my father immediately hired a private coach and built a batting cage in our backyard. When I developed a passion for plants and started a small vegetable garden at the same age, my mother complained about the dirt I tracked into the house, and my father dismissed it as playing in the mud. "Jack has real talent," my father would say after his games, proudly displaying his trophies on the mantel. My science fair ribbons and certificates for environmental projects remained in desk drawers, brought out only when I specifically asked why they weren't displayed. By middle school, the pattern was firmly established. When Jack made the honor roll, our parents took him to a Chicago Bulls game with courtside seats. When I achieved the same academic success, they simply nodded and said, "That's what we expect." The message became increasingly clear. Academic achievement was the baseline expectation, but only certain types of success truly mattered in our family. Christmas and birthdays further highlighted the disparity. On his 16th birthday, Jack received a brand new sports car with a big red bow in the driveway. For my 16th, I got a used sedan because, as my father explained, you just need something practical to get around. It wasn't about the monetary value, though. That difference was significant. It was about the thought, excitement, and celebration that accompanied gifts for Jack versus the practical, almost obligatory nature of mine. My grandmother Eleanor was the exception in our family. My father's mother had grown up on a small farm in southern Illinois before marrying my grandfather and moving to the suburbs. She understood my fascination with growing things and nurtured my interest in environmental science. "Not everyone measures success with a dollar sign," she would tell me during our weekend visits to her small house with its magnificent garden. "Some of us measure it by how much good we put back into the earth." Under her guidance, I learned about companion planting, composting, and sustainable growing practices. While my parents saw these interests as odd and impractical, Grandma Eleanor recognized them as a genuine calling. She gifted me rare seeds, specialty gardening tools, and books about innovative agricultural practices that I devoured during summer breaks. "You have a gift, Candy," she would say, her weathered hands guiding mine as we transplanted seedlings. "The world needs people who understand that we can't keep taking from the land without giving back." During my junior year of high school, I developed a vertical gardening system for my science project that won regional recognition. Local news covered the story, and a small sustainable farming magazine interviewed me about the design. My parents attended the award ceremony out of obligation, but seemed uncomfortable when other parents congratulated them. "It's just a school project," my father said dismissively to a colleague who mentioned seeing me in the newspaper. "Jack is the one applying to Wharton next year. That's something with real potential." The summer before my senior year, Grandma Eleanor was diagnosed with aggressive cancer. I spent every possible moment with her, often doing homework in her hospital room, and telling her about my plans to study environmental science in college. "Promise me you'll follow your heart," she said, during one of her last lucid days, her once strong voice barely above a whisper. "Your father lost his way chasing money. Don't make the same mistake." She passed away 3 weeks before graduation, leaving me without my only ally in the family. At the funeral, I overheard my father telling relatives that I was going through a phase with this environmental stuff and would eventually come around to something practical. That night alone in my room, surrounded by college brochures for environmental science programs, I made a silent promise to my grandmother that I would stay true to my passion, even without her support. When college acceptance letters arrived, the family's different standards became even more apparent. Jack had been accepted to Northwestern's prestigious business program, and our parents threw a lavish party to celebrate, inviting family, friends, and business associates to toast his bright future. My acceptance to the University of Illinois for environmental science was acknowledged with a brief, "That's nice, dear," over breakfast. When I mentioned the program's excellent reputation and my excitement about their sustainable agriculture research, my father glanced up from his newspaper. "Environmental science. What exactly does one do with that degree?" "Save the rainforest," he asked with a chuckle that made it clear he didn't expect a serious answer. "Actually, there are growing opportunities in sustainable agriculture, corporate sustainability consulting, and environmental policy," I explained, having researched career paths extensively. "The field is expanding as companies recognize the business value of sustainable practices." My father exchanged a look with my mother. "If businesses are involved, maybe there's hope for you yet," he said, returning to his newspaper. The financial disparity in our college experiences was equally telling. My parents paid Jack's full tuition, bought him a new apartment near campus, and provided a generous monthly allowance. For me, they covered tuition and basic dormitory costs, but made it clear that extras would be my responsibility. "Consider it a learning experience," my mother explained when I asked about the difference. "Jack is pursuing a serious career path that will require networking and connections. Your interests are more of a personal choice." I found work at the campus sustainability office for 20 hours a week, balancing employment with full-time studies. While Jack posted social media updates from fraternity formals and networking events with financial industry leaders, I divided my time between classes work and the university's experimental agricultural plots. Despite the additional workload, I thrived academically. My understanding of sustainable growing systems caught the attention of Professor Diana Williams, the department's leading researcher in urban agriculture. "Your vertical growing design shows real innovation," she told me after reviewing my freshman project. "Have you considered how this might be scaled for urban food deserts?" Under her mentorship, I expanded my high school project into a comprehensive system that maximized growing space while minimizing water usage. By junior year, my design was being implemented in a pilot program at a community garden near campus. While the project received a university innovation grant of $15,000, my excitement was dampened by my family's reaction when I shared the news during a weekend visit home. "That's great, honey," my mother said absently, then immediately turned to Jack. "Did you tell Candy about your summer internship offer from Goldman Sachs?" The rest of dinner was devoted to Jack's career prospects, the connections he was making, and the entry-level salary he could expect after graduation. My grant-funded project that could help address food insecurity wasn't worth more than a passing acknowledgement. As graduation approached, the divergence in our paths became even more pronounced. Jack completed his business degree, and with our father's connections, secured a position at a prestigious financial firm in Chicago, with a starting salary that made my mother beam with pride when she told her friends. I graduated with honors in environmental science, with a specialization in sustainable agricultural systems and a minor in business sustainability. The job market in my field was more challenging, particularly for roles that aligned with my specific interests. After several months of searching, I accepted an unpaid internship at Urban Harvest, a nonprofit focused on developing community gardens in underserved Chicago neighborhoods. An unpaid internship. At your age, my father's disappointment was palpable when I shared the news over dinner. Jack was earning six figures by the time he was 23. This gives me hands-on experience in exactly the field I want to work in, I explained. They're implementing innovative growing systems in urban environments. It's cutting-edge work. Cutting-edge gardening, my father muttered. Is this really the return we get on 4 years of college tuition? My mother placed her hand on my arm. Darling, have you considered getting an MBA with your undergraduate degree and some business credentials? You might find opportunities with better compensation. The suggestion was clear abandon my passion for something more lucrative. I declined as politely as I could, explaining that I was committed to my current path. The conversation shifted to Jack's recent bonus and his plans to start looking for a condo in an upscale Chicago neighborhood. Rather than continue living at home under the weight of their disappointment, I found a tiny studio apartment in a less expensive part of the city. The commute to my internship was long, and the neighborhood wasn't great, but the space was mine, free from the constant comparisons and thinly veiled suggestions that I reconsider my choices. You're making this harder than it needs to be, my mother said when I moved out. We only want what's best for you. I know, Mom, I replied, understanding that in their own way they did want me to be happy. But we disagree about what best looks like. 3 years after graduation, I had worked my way up from unpaid intern to project manager at Urban Harvest. My salary was modest by Chicago standards, requiring careful budgeting and a continued residence in my small studio apartment, but I found genuine fulfillment in my work. Under my management, we had established 7 thriving community gardens in food deserts across the city, teaching residents sustainable growing practices while providing fresh produce in areas with limited grocery access. My innovative vertical growing systems had been featured in a sustainability magazine, and I had been invited to speak at a regional conference on urban agriculture. These professional accomplishments brought me personal satisfaction, even as they remained largely unacknowledged by my family, who still measured success in promotions and salary increases. Our family dinners had become less frequent, but no less tense with my parents' questions, inevitably focusing on my financial situation rather than the impact of my work. Jack, meanwhile, continued his rapid ascent in the financial world, each promotion and bonus celebrated with expensive gifts and proud announcements to their social circle. The real turning point came during what should have been a happy family occasion. Jack had recently proposed to Amanda, the daughter of one of my father's golf club friends. She came from a similarly affluent background, worked in marketing for a luxury brand, and perfectly fit my parents' vision of an ideal daughter-in-law. My mother immediately began planning an elaborate engagement dinner at their home, calling it the social event of the season within their circle. I arrived early to help with preparations, genuinely happy for my brother despite our different life paths. Jack and I had maintained a cordial, if somewhat distant, relationship over the years. While he didn't understand my career choices, he had never been openly dismissive the way our parents were. "Thanks for coming," he said, greeting me with a brief hug. "It means a lot to Amanda. She doesn't have siblings, so she's excited about having a sister-in-law." The dining room was transformed with fresh flowers, fine china, and crystal glassware that only appeared for the most special occasions. My mother had hired a caterer, and the menu featured all of Jack's favorites. As guests arrived, the house filled with my parents' friends, Amanda's family, and several of Jack's colleagues. I recognized no one from my own social or professional circles, another subtle reminder of how separate our worlds had become. Dinner proceeded with multiple toasts to the happy couple stories about Jack's childhood achievements and warm welcomes to Amanda as the newest addition to the family. My father, clearly emotional, after several glasses of expensive champagne, stood for what we all expected to be a final toast. "Family is everything," he began, his voice thick with pride. "Nothing matters more than seeing your children succeed and build their own lives. Jack has always made us proud, from his first steps to his last promotion." He raised his glass higher. "And now, as he prepares to start his own family, his mother and I want to help lay the foundation." He reached into his jacket pocket and removed an envelope. "Amanda, Jack, we want to present you with something to help you begin your life together properly." He handed the envelope to Jack, who opened it and removed a check. His eyes widened slightly before he passed it to Amanda, whose perfect makeup couldn't hide her look of delighted surprise. $230,000, my father announced, to appreciative murmurs from the guests. "A down payment for a house worthy of the family you'll build together." The table erupted in applause, while I sat frozen, my champagne glass halfway to my lips. $230,000. More money than I would earn in several years. Given freely, proudly, publicly to my brother, while I struggled to make rent each month on my project manager's salary. I forced a smile and joined the applause, fighting back the complicated emotions rising in my chest. This wasn't about jealousy or wanting material things for myself. It was about the stark, undeniable evidence of how differently my parents valued our life choices. After dinner, as guests mingled with after-dinner drinks, I slipped into the kitchen to help the catering staff clean up, needing a moment away from the celebration. As I was stacking dessert plates, I heard my parents enter the adjacent butler's pantry, unaware of my presence on the other side of the partition. "A perfect evening," my mother was saying. "Everyone was so impressed with Jack and Amanda. They make such a handsome couple." "He's done everything right," my father agreed, the ice clinking in his Scotch glass. "The right school, the right career, the right girl. We couldn't ask for more." There was a pause, and I should have made my presence known, but something kept me silent, sensing the conversation wasn't finished. "At least one of our children isn't a failure," my father continued, his voice lower, but still clear enough. "All that education and Candy's playing with plants while living paycheck to paycheck. I don't understand where we went wrong with her." The plate in my hand nearly slipped as the word failure echoed in my head. After years of dismissal and disapproval hearing my father explicitly confirm what I had always suspected was still a knife to the heart. "She's still young," my mother offered half-heartedly. "Maybe she'll come around eventually." "I doubt it. She's as stubborn as my mother was. Speaking of which, I still think it was a mistake for Mom to encourage all that gardening nonsense. Put ideas in her head about saving the world instead of building a proper career." I set down the plate carefully and stepped into the pantry doorway. My parents startled, exchanging guilty glances that confirmed they hadn't intended for me to hear their assessment. Candy, My mother began her social smile quickly, replacing the surprise. We were just coming to find you for the champagne toast to Jack and Amanda's new home. No, you weren't, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I expected. You were discussing what a failure I am. Don't worry, I heard you clearly. My father straightened defensively. You misunderstood. We were just expressing concern about your financial situation. No, Dad. I understood perfectly. You gave Jack $230,000 tonight because he followed your approved life plan. Meanwhile, I'm a failure because I chose work that matters to me over a bigger paycheck. That's not fair, my mother interjected. Jack has made practical choices that set him up for long-term security. We're just worried about your future. My future is building sustainable food systems for communities that need them. I'm sorry that's not impressive enough for you. My father set down his drink, his expression hardening. This childish idealism has gone on long enough, Candy. You have a good education that could be applied to something worthwhile. Instead, you're wasting your potential on glorified gardening projects that will never provide real security. Years of suppressed hurt and anger finally boiled over, worthwhile. My work helps people in food deserts access fresh produce. We're teaching sustainability practices that will matter for generations. Just because it doesn't come with a corner office and stock options doesn't make it worthless. No one is saying your little gardens aren't nice, my mother said, in the placating tone she used when trying to smooth over uncomfortable situations. We just want more for you than struggling to pay rent while doing charity work. It's not charity work, Mom. It's my career, my passion, and it's making a real difference. A real difference to your bank account would make a bigger difference to your life, my father countered. Jack understood that from the beginning. That's why we're able to help him with a house now, because he's demonstrated responsibility. So that's it. Financial gifts are only for children who follow your approved career paths. My father's patience visibly thinned. Why would we invest in your future when you've chosen to be a failure? The word hung between us, confirming everything I had just overheard. My mother's eyes widened slightly at my father's bluntness, but she said nothing to contradict him. I see, I said, a strange calm, replacing the hurt as everything crystallized. Thank you for making your position so clear. I walked past them back to the dining room, gathered my purse and jacket, and quietly said goodbye to Jack and Amanda, congratulating them once more. Neither of my parents followed me, or attempted to explain or apologize as I left their house. Driving home through sheets of rain that matched my mood, I made a decision that had been building for years. Until my parents could respect my choices and see value in my work beyond its earning potential, I would stop seeking their approval or subjecting myself to their judgment. In my apartment that night, I deleted their contact information from my phone, unfriended them on social media, and blocked their numbers. The finality of these actions brought both pain and an unexpected sense of liberation. For the first time since childhood, I would no longer measure my worth through their disappointed eyes. The first few weeks after cutting contact with my parents were both liberating and terrifying. Without the constant weight of their disapproval, I felt lighter. But the absence of family, even family that didn't understand me, left an undeniable void. I threw myself into my work at Urban Harvest, channeling my emotional energy into expanding our community garden program and refining my vertical growing systems. The hydroponic setup I had developed as an undergraduate project had evolved significantly through years of testing and iteration. My latest design reduced water usage by 60% compared to traditional systems while increasing yield in limited spaces. At Urban Harvest, we had implemented these systems in 3 community gardens, but I knew the potential applications were much broader. During a particularly successful harvest day at our newest garden site, I ran into Professor Williams, my undergraduate mentor, who was volunteering with a group of her current students. "Candy, this system is remarkable," she said, examining the vertical towers bursting with leafy greens. "You've solved the water circulation issues we discussed years ago." We spent the afternoon catching up, and I shared my ideas for expanding the system to commercial applications. The technology could transform urban food production, but nonprofit budgets are too limited to scale it properly, I explained. Professor Williams listened thoughtfully, then said, "You should meet Marcus Chen. He runs an agricultural technology investment fund focused on sustainability. This is exactly the kind of innovation he's looking for." That introduction changed everything. Marcus visited one of our community gardens the following week, asking detailed questions about water efficiency, nutrient delivery, and scalability. 2 weeks later, he invited me to present a formal business plan to his investment team. "Your technology has commercial potential far beyond community gardens," he explained. "With proper funding, you could develop systems for restaurants, grocery chains, even residential applications." The prospect of expanding my work beyond urban harvest was both exciting and intimidating. I had never seen myself as an entrepreneur, but the possibility of scaling my impact was too compelling to ignore. Over the next month, I worked nights and weekends developing a comprehensive business plan for what would become Vertical Bloom, a company specialized in designing and implementing space-efficient growing systems for urban environments. Marcus's fund offered initial investment of $75,000 in exchange for 20% equity, enough to secure a small workshop space and hire a part-time engineer to help refine the technology. I took a leave of absence from Urban Harvest, promising to continue supporting their gardens while pursuing this new venture. The early days of entrepreneurship were grueling. I worked 80-hour weeks, splitting time between technical development business operations and desperate attempts to secure our first commercial clients. For the first 3 months, I paid myself nothing, continuing to live in my tiny studio and stretching my savings to the breaking point. There were moments of crippling doubt, usually at 3 in the morning, when I'd wake wondering if my father had been right all along. Was I foolishly pursuing an idealistic dream while my brother built a real career? These doubts were particularly acute during holidays, when the absence of family, however difficult they had been, felt most pronounced. My first real breakthrough came 4 months in, when a regional grocery chain agreed to pilot my growing system in one of their stores, creating an in-house produce department that would grow lettuce, herbs, and small vegetables right before customers' eyes. The marketing appeal of ultra-fresh, zero-transportation produce, combined with the significant reduction in water usage and elimination of pesticides, created a compelling business case. The installation was featured in local business news, bringing attention to Vertical Bloom and generating inquiries from restaurants and other grocers. 6 months after founding the company, we hired our first full-time employees, a brilliant mechanical engineer named Layla, who helped refine our irrigation system, and a horticulturist named Ryan, who expanded the variety of plants our system could support. Occasionally, through mutual acquaintances or distant relatives, I would hear updates about my family. Jack and Amanda had purchased a luxury townhouse in Lincoln Park with my parents' generous down payment. My father had received a significant promotion at his firm. My mother was chairing another charity gala. These snippets of their continuing lives without me brought a mixture of sadness and relief that we were all moving forward on our separate paths. Some well-meaning relatives tried to bridge the gap, inviting me to events where my parents would be present or relaying messages suggesting reconciliation. I remained firm in my boundary, explaining that I would consider reconnecting when my parents could respect my choices and acknowledged the hurtful ways they had dismissed my work. "They miss you," my Aunt Susan told me during one such conversation. "They talk about you more than you'd think." "They miss who they wanted me to be," I replied, "not who I actually am." As Vertical Bloom completed its first year of operation, we reached an unexpected milestone: profitability. It was modest, but our balance sheet showed black numbers instead of red for the first time. We had installed systems in 8 commercial locations and had a waiting list of potential clients. A prominent restaurant group had contracted us to build a rooftop growing system for their farm-to-table concept, our largest project to date. I moved from my studio apartment to a small but charming one-bedroom in a safer neighborhood, allowing myself this one indulgence after years of strict frugality. It was nowhere near the luxury townhouse Jack enjoyed, but it was mine, earned through work I believed in. With the business stabilizing, I began saving aggressively toward a dream that had been forming since my days, with Grandma Eleanor owning land where I could test and refine growing systems on a larger scale. Not just urban applications, but innovations that could be applied to traditional agriculture to reduce resource usage while maintaining productivity. I opened a separate savings account labeled Farm Fund and directed 30% of my modest salary into it each month, along with any extra consulting fees I earned. The balance grew slowly but steadily as Vertical Bloom continued to expand. By the end of our second year, we had 16 employees and had opened a larger production facility where we manufactured our proprietary growing systems. Coverage in a national sustainability magazine brought attention from larger potential clients, including a hotel chain interested in rooftop gardens and a school district looking to implement educational growing systems. Marcus introduced me to additional investors interested in our Series A funding round, allowing us to expand operations further and develop new product lines. My original 20% stake in the company was diluted with the new investment, but the overall valuation had increased so significantly that my net worth on paper was now approaching 7 figures, a fact that would have shocked my parents had they known. Through it all, I maintained the boundaries I had established. When a wedding invitation arrived for a cousin's ceremony where my parents would be in attendance, I sent a generous gift but declined to attend. When Jack left a voicemail on my work phone, the only number he could reach me at about a family health scare involving our mother, which turned out to be minor, I responded with a brief email expressing concern but maintained my distance. As the second anniversary of my decision to cut contact approached, the farm fund had grown to a respectable down payment for the kind of property I envisioned. I began working with a real estate agent specializing in agricultural properties within commuting distance of Chicago, looking for the right combination of good soil, existing structures, and proximity to the city where our business operations would remain. After viewing a dozen properties that weren't quite right, the agent called with excitement about a new listing. 40 acres just came on the market in McHenry County. It has an old farmhouse that needs work, a large barn in decent condition, and perfect southern exposure for your test fields. The owner is motivated to sell quickly. The property was at the upper end of my budget, requiring every cent of my savings, plus a mortgage that would stretch my finances thin. But the moment I drove up the long gravel driveway, I knew it was exactly what I had been working toward. The 1,920 farmhouse had good bones. Despite its outdated interior, the barn would provide ample space for equipment and initial growing trials, and the gently rolling fields offered perfect conditions for side-by-side testing of different agricultural methods. I submitted an offer the same day, and after brief negotiations, it was accepted. 60 days later, I became the owner of 40 acres of possibility. the physical manifestation of the path I had chosen, despite my family's disapproval. The day I received the keys, I stood in the center of what would become my first test field, the late afternoon sun warming my face as I surveyed land that was now mine. In that moment, I felt Grandma Eleanor's presence strongly, as if she were standing beside me nodding approval at the seeds I was preparing to plant, both literally and figuratively. 2 years after cutting contact with my parents, Vertical Bloom had become a respected name in sustainable agriculture technology. We employed 15 full-time staff, had systems installed in 3 states, and were in discussions with an international hotel chain about implementing our growing systems in their properties worldwide. The company's success had provided financial stability I hadn't imagined possible when starting out, but my greatest joy came from the farm property I now called home. Over 6 months of evenings and weekends, with help from friends and colleagues, I had renovated the farmhouse into a comfortable living space that maintained its historic character while adding modern conveniences. The barn had been transformed into a combination workshop and research space where we tested new growing system prototypes before implementing them commercially. The first 5 acres of fields were now dedicated to comparative growing trials with traditional methods alongside various sustainable approaches, meticulously documented to quantify differences in resource usage and yield. Moving day had been a community effort with my close friend Zoe, organizing a group of friends to help transport furniture and boxes from my apartment to the farmhouse. By sunset, we were sitting on the wide front porch with pizza and beer celebrating this milestone that represented not just a change of address, but the culmination of a vision that had sustained me through years of dismissal and doubt. To Candy, Zoe toasted, raising her bottle, who knew exactly what she wanted and never gave up even when the people who should have supported her the most couldn't see her vision. The words brought unexpected tears to my eyes, acknowledgement of both the achievement and the family absence that still ached despite my professional fulfillment. These friends had become my chosen family, supporting my dreams without questioning their value, but the empty space where biological family should have been remained a quiet sadness I had learned to live with. The universe has a strange sense of timing and irony. The very next day, as I was unpacking boxes in my new kitchen, I heard a vehicle coming up the long driveway. Assuming it was one of the friends who had helped with the move returning with a forgotten item, I stepped onto the porch, only to freeze at the sight of a familiar luxury SUV I hadn't seen in 2 years. Jack's vehicle slowed to a stop, and I watched my brother and his wife Amanda stare through the windshield at me, standing on the porch of the renovated farmhouse. Their expressions shifted from confusion to surprise as they took in the extent of the property spreading out behind me. Jack rolled down his window. "Candy, is that you?" "Jack," I acknowledged, my voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." He got out of the car slowly, looking around at the property with obvious amazement. We were driving back from Amanda's parents' place in Wisconsin and took the scenic route. I saw the Vertical Bloom sign at the end of the driveway and couldn't believe it. "Is this yours?" "Yes," I said simply. "All 40 acres. Amanda joined him, elegant as always, in designer casual wear that looked out of place on the gravel driveway. "It's beautiful," she offered, seeming genuine, despite her obvious surprise. "The house is charming." An awkward silence fell between us, 2 years of no contact, creating a chasm wider than the physical distance separating us on the driveway. Finally, I sighed and gestured toward the house. "Would you like to come in? I just made coffee." They followed me inside their designer shoes, looking out of place on the restored hardwood floors. I gave them a brief tour of the main floor, explaining the renovations we'd completed and plans for the remaining spaces. "You did all this yourself?" Jack asked, genuine curiosity in his voice as he examined the exposed beam ceiling we had uncovered during renovation. With help from friends, the bones were good, it just needed updating. We settled at the kitchen table with coffee, the conversation stilted and cautious. Jack explained they had been visiting Amanda's parents for the weekend and were taking an alternate route back to the city to avoid highway construction. I almost didn't turn in when I saw the sign, he admitted. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. I'm not sure either, I said honestly. But you're here now. Jack looked down at his coffee cup. I've thought about reaching out so many times. After what happened, the things Dad said. I should have said something. Yes, you should have, I agreed, without rancor. But we all made our choices. I didn't know you had started your own company, he continued, or that it was doing well enough for this. He gestured at the house and property visible through the windows. There's a lot you don't know about my life, Jack. That was part of the problem. He nodded slowly. I know that now. Actually, I've been following your company's progress for the past year. One of our clients invested in agricultural technology startups, and your name came up during a meeting. I couldn't believe it was my little sister they were talking about as this innovative CEO. The revelation surprised me. You never reached out. I didn't know what to say. After standing by while Dad called you a failure, then accepting their money for our house, I was ashamed, Candy. Amanda touched his arm supportively. Jack's been questioning a lot of things lately. His career path, the choices we've made. Jack's expression confirmed her words. I'm good at my job, but I don't love it the way you obviously love what you're doing. Every morning I put on the suit and play the role Dad groomed me for. And lately I've been wondering if I'm living his dream instead of mine. The admission was so unexpected that I didn't immediately know how to respond. Jack had always seemed perfectly content with the golden child role, accepting the expectations and rewards that came with following our parents' approved life plan. What would you do instead? I finally asked. He shrugged, looking suddenly younger and less certain than the confident financial executive I was accustomed to seeing. I don't know yet, but watching you build something meaningful on your own terms, it's made me think. After finishing our coffee, I offered to show them the rest of the property. We walked through the converted barn, with its experimental growing systems out to the test fields, where different agricultural methods were being compared side by side, and finally to the small orchard I was restoring with heritage apple varieties. Throughout the tour, Jack asked increasingly thoughtful questions about the business, the technology, and my vision for the future. Not the dismissive queries our father would have posed about revenue and return on investment, but genuine interest in the work itself and its potential impact. As we returned to the house, Jack stopped at the edge of the vegetable garden, looking back over the property. Dad was wrong about you, Candy. So wrong. He turned to face me directly. You're not a failure. You've built something amazing here. The words I had longed to hear from my father coming, instead from my brother, brought an unexpected wave of emotion. Before I could respond, Jack pulled out his phone. Dad needs to see this. He needs to understand what you've accomplished. A flash of panic shot through me. Jack, I don't think that's a good idea. The boundaries I set 2 years ago still stand. But Jack was already dialing, putting the phone on speaker as it rang. Our father answered on the third ring, his familiar voice sending a jolt through me after so long. Jack, everything. Okay, aren't you driving back from Amanda's parents? Dad, you need to see what Candy has built. Jack's voice was urgent, almost angry. She owns 40 acres in McHenry County. She's built a successful company. She has employees and clients in multiple states. Everything you said about her was wrong. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. You're with Candy. Our father's voice had lost its usual certainty. Yes, we happened to drive past her property. Dad, you and Mom need to come see this. You need to understand what she's doing. Another long pause. Is she there? Can I speak with her? Jack looked at me questioningly. After a moment's hesitation, I shook my head. I wasn't ready for that conversation, not yet, not like this. She's not available right now, Jack said, respecting my decision. But Dad, I'm serious. The things you said that night, you were wrong. Candy isn't wasting her potential or playing with plants. She's building something important. I see, our father said, his tone unreadable. Well, thank you for letting me know, son. Your mother and I will discuss this. After hanging up, Jack turned to me apologetically. I'm sorry if that was overstepping. I just couldn't let him continue thinking you were struggling or failing when the reality is so different. I wasn't sure how to feel about Jack's intervention. Part of me appreciated his attempt to correct our father's misconceptions, while another part felt protective of the life I had built without their validation or involvement. It's done now, I said finally. But Jack, I need you to understand something. I didn't build this to prove Dad wrong or to show that I could be successful on his terms. I built it because this work matters to me, because I believe in what we're creating. I know, he said quietly. That's what makes it even more impressive. You did it for the right reasons. As they prepared to leave, Jack asked hesitantly if we could stay in touch. I've missed having a sister, he admitted, and I'd like to know more about your work if you're willing to share it. The request was sincere, and despite the complicated feelings his visit had stirred up, I found myself nodding. I'd like that. But Jack, I need you to respect my boundaries with Mom and Dad. If we rebuild our relationship, it needs to be separate from them for now. I understand, he assured me. This is between us. As I watched their car disappear down the driveway, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. The unexpected reconnection with Jack had opened a door I had assumed would remain closed, while simultaneously reminding me of all I had accomplished on my own terms, without the approval or support I had once craved from my parents. Whether they ever came to understand or value, my choices remained to be seen. But standing on the porch of my farmhouse, looking out over land that represented my vision becoming reality, I knew with certainty that I had chosen the right path for myself, regardless of their judgment. The week following Jack's unexpected visit passed in a blur of normal activity. I had several meetings with potential clients, supervised a new installation at a downtown restaurant, and continued the never-ending process of unpacking boxes at the farmhouse. If I checked my phone more frequently than usual, expecting perhaps another call from Jack or even my parents, I tried not to acknowledge it consciously. 7 days after Jack's visit, I returned home from the office to find a black Mercedes sedan parked in my driveway. My stomach tightened instantly in recognition of my father's car. After 2 years of complete separation, both my brother and parents had appeared at my doorstep within the span of a week. I sat in my truck for several minutes, gathering my composure and considering my options. I could drive away, avoiding the confrontation entirely. I could call and ask them to leave. Or I could face whatever conversation they had come to have on my territory and my terms. Taking a deep breath, I chose the third option, stepping out of my truck and walking toward the house where my parents stood awkwardly on the porch. My mother looked older than I remembered her, carefully maintained appearance, showing subtle signs of the passage of time. My father stood stiffly beside her, his expression unreadable behind his usual mask of professional composure. "Candy," my mother said, as I approached, her voice wavering slightly. "You look well." "What are you doing here?" I asked, directly stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. My father cleared his throat. Jack told us about his visit, about your property and business. We wanted to see for ourselves. 2 years of silence, and now you just show up unannounced. The hurt I thought I had processed resurfaced unexpectedly. We should have called first, my mother acknowledged. We weren't sure you would agree to see us. She wasn't wrong. Had they called ahead, I likely would have declined the visit, not feeling ready for whatever judgment or conditional approval they might offer. Well, you're here now, I said, echoing the words I had used with Jack. I unlocked the door but didn't immediately invite them inside. Why exactly did you come? My father gestured at the property surrounding us. To see what you've built. Jack was quite emphatic about us having the wrong impression of your situation. The careful wording was typical of my father, avoiding any direct admission of error or apology. Still, the fact that they had driven out here represented a step I hadn't expected them to take. Fine, I said, pushing open the door. I'll show you around and then we can talk. Unlike Jack's visit, which had carried the awkwardness of estrangement, but not the weight of direct hurt, showing my parents my home and work, felt both vindicating and vulnerable. As we moved through the house, my mother commented on the charm of the original features we had preserved, and the tasteful updates her interior decorator's eye, noting details most would miss. You've done a beautiful job with the renovation, she said, seemingly genuine in her approval. The space has so much character. My father remained largely silent until we reached my home office, where framed press coverage of vertical bloom lined one wall alongside technical drawings of our growing systems. Your brother mentioned you had systems in 3 states, he said, studying the materials. How many employees does your company have now? 15 full-time, plus contractors, for installations. I answered, watching his expression as he processed this information. In the barn workshop, I explained our latest innovations in water reclamation and nutrient delivery, the technical aspects of the business that translated into measurable efficiency improvements for our clients. For the first time, I saw my father's professional interest engaged, as he asked questions about scalability and patent protection. As we walked the test fields, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the carefully plotted sections, my mother asked about the different crops we were growing and why certain methods were placed side by side. We're comparing water usage, yield, and nutrient density between traditional methods and our modified approaches, I explained, pointing out the irrigation systems and monitoring stations. The data helps refine our commercial systems and provides case studies for potential clients. By the time we completed the tour, the tension had shifted from hostile to merely uncomfortable. Back at the house, I offered coffee more out of ingrained politeness than genuine hospitality, and we settled at the kitchen table for the conversation I had been both anticipating and dreading for 2 years. Your operation is impressive. Candy, my father began, his tone suggesting he was evaluating a business presentation rather than reconnecting with his daughter, clearly more substantial than we understood. That's because you never asked, I replied evenly. You decided my work wasn't valuable because it didn't fit your definition of success. My mother placed her hand on my father's arm, a gesture I recognized from countless family discussions where she tried to soften his approach. We were concerned about your financial security, she offered. We didn't understand that you were building something with such potential. The careful choice of potential, rather than acknowledging the actual achievement, wasn't lost on me. Even now, they were measuring my work by its financial prospects rather than its inherent value or my passion for it. My work had value even when I was making $28,000 a year at Urban Harvest, I said firmly. The impact of what I do doesn't start and end with a balance sheet. My father shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we focus too much on conventional measures of success, he conceded, the closest thing to an admission of error I had ever heard from him. Your brother was quite upset with us after seeing your operation, said we had been unfair in our assessment. Jack called you a failure, my mother said quietly, looking down at her coffee cup. Those were his exact words, Candy. And we didn't correct him. That was wrong. The direct acknowledgement of the words that had driven me to cut contact caught me off guard. I had expected deflection or minimization, not this straightforward reference to the painful breaking point. Yes, it was wrong, I agreed, meeting her gaze. It was the culmination of years of dismissal and disappointment because I chose a different path than the one you prescribed. My father's jaw tightened, his instinct to defend himself visibly at war with whatever purpose had brought them here. We wanted security for you, he said finally. The kind of security we provided for Jack with the house down payment. The mention of the $230,000 gift that had been the final straw hung between us. I took a deep breath, determined to address it directly. That night made it abundantly clear where I stood in the family hierarchy, I said. It wasn't just the money, though. That disparity was certainly stark. It was hearing myself described as a failure, after years of working toward goals you never bothered to understand or value. We should have supported your choices, my mother said, surprising me, with the directness of her admission, even if we didn't fully understand them. That's what parents are supposed to do. My father looked out the window toward the fields where evidence of my vision was taking physical form. I built my career in a world where success had clear metrics, he said slowly. Profit margins, asset growth, measurable return on investment. I applied the same metrics to my children's choices without considering that different fields operate by different measures of value. It was perhaps the most insight he had ever offered into his perspective. An acknowledgement, however, limited that his framework was not the only valid one. Your work here, he gestured toward the property, visible through the windows, has metrics of its own. Sustainability improvements, resource conservation, innovations that address real problems. He met my eyes directly. I didn't have the right vocabulary to evaluate what you were building, so I dismissed it instead. That was short-sighted of me. From my father, this qualified acknowledgement was significant, perhaps the closest to an apology his pride would allow. My mother reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. We've missed you, Candy. Finding out from Jack that you've built all this while we were completely absent from your life. It made us realize how much we've lost through our own narrow thinking. The sincerity in her voice penetrated the protective walls I had built. I missed you too, I admitted. But I couldn't keep subjecting myself to constant disapproval and dismissal. It was destroying me. And the fact that we drove you to cut contact completely should tell us something about how badly we failed as parents, my mother said. A directness unusual for her conflict-averse nature. My father cleared his throat. If we were to try again, what would that look like from your perspective? The question surprised me. I had expected, perhaps, grudging acknowledgement of my accomplishments, but not this tentative step toward rebuilding a relationship. It would require real respect for my choices and my work, I said after a moment's consideration. Not just because the business is successful now, but because the work itself has value. And it would mean acknowledging the hurt caused by years of comparing me unfavorably to Jack and dismissing my path as worthless. My father nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. As they prepared to leave an hour later, the conversation, having covered painful ground, but reached no definitive resolution, my father paused at the door. Your grandmother would be proud of what you've built here, he said unexpectedly. She always said you had a special connection to the land. I should have listened to her more carefully. The mention of Grandma Eleanor, the acknowledgement of her influence that he had previously dismissed, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I simply nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After they drove away, I sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset color the sky above my fields, processing the unexpected visit and its implications. The relationship remained fragile, the hurt not fully healed, but a door had been opened that I had believed permanently closed. Jack called that evening to check in, having heard from our parents about their visit. They were pretty quiet afterward, he reported. But Dad mentioned that your business model was more sophisticated than expected, which coming from him is practically gushing praise. I laughed despite myself. Baby steps, I guess? Are you okay with them reaching out? He asked. I feel responsible since I prompted this by calling Dad from your place. I'm processing it, I answered honestly. Part of me is glad they made the effort to see what I've built. Another part is wary of getting hurt again if their newfound respect is conditional on my financial success rather than the value of the work itself. That's fair, Jack acknowledged. For what it's worth, I think seeing your place in person really affected them. It's one thing to hear about your company, another to see the physical manifestation of your vision. It made it real in a way that words couldn't. As we ended the call, I realized that while the visit hadn't provided the clean resolution of a television family drama, it had begun a process of reassessment and potential healing that would unfold in its own time with boundaries I now felt empowered to maintain. 6 months after my parents' unexpected visit to the farm, the landscape, both literal and emotional, had shifted significantly. Spring had transformed the test fields into a vibrant tapestry of green, experimental crops, thriving under various growing methods we were evaluating. The farm had become not just my home, but a living laboratory where Vertical Bloom tested innovations before implementing them for clients. The relationship with my family had similarly begun to take new form, cautious growth, replacing the barren silence of the previous 2 years. Jack and I had reestablished regular contact with him, visiting the farm monthly, genuinely interested in the business, and occasionally bringing his financial expertise to bear on growth strategies. You know, he said during one such visit, helping me install monitoring equipment in a new test plot, I never expected to enjoy getting my hands dirty like this. Dad would have a heart attack seeing his investment banker son doing manual labor on a farm. The comment revealed how much Jack himself was changing, finding satisfaction in activities outside the narrow definition of success we had been raised with. He had recently reduced his work hours to 4 days a week, using the extra time to explore interests long suppressed under professional expectations. My relationship with my parents was evolving more slowly, with careful steps on both sides. We had established a monthly phone call, somewhat formal at first, but gradually becoming more natural. My mother had visited the farm twice more, each time bringing something for the house, a peace offering in the language of homemaking she understood best. My father remained more reserved, but made efforts in his own way, sending articles about agricultural technology or sustainability initiatives he encountered in his work. It was his method of demonstrating that he was now paying attention to a field he had previously dismissed, trying to understand my world on its own terms. The most significant test of our fragile new dynamic came with an invitation to dinner at the farmhouse. After much consideration, I had decided it was time to attempt a family gathering on my territory where I felt most secure and confident. The evening arrived with perfect early autumn weather, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of ripening apples from the orchard. I had prepared a meal featuring produce from the farm, a tangible demonstration of the bounty that could be created through sustainable methods. Jack and Amanda arrived first, bringing wine and an easy familiarity with the space from their regular visits. My parents followed shortly after my mother, carrying a photo album I didn't recognize. Dinner conversation remained mostly safe, focusing on Jack and Amanda's recent vacation and updates about extended family members. As we moved to the porch for coffee after the meal, my mother handed me the album she had brought. "I've been going through old photographs," she explained. "I realized we have so few of your accomplishments compared to Jack's. All those science fairs and projects that we didn't fully document." The album contained what photos she had managed to find of my early environmental projects, school awards, and even recent press clippings about vertical bloom that she had collected without my knowledge. The effort to acknowledge my path, however belated, was touching in its sincerity. "Thank you," I said, simply recognizing the gesture for what it was, an attempt to rewrite the narrative of indifference that had characterized their response to my achievements. As the evening progressed, my father cleared his throat in the deliberate way that signaled he had something important to address. "Candy, your mother and I have been discussing something we'd like to propose." I tensed, slightly unsure what was coming. "We've been reflecting on the disparity in how we supported you and Jack financially," he continued carefully. "The house down payment that became a breaking point between us." Jack shifted uncomfortably in his chair, still carrying some guilt about his role in the family fracture. "We'd like to make an equivalent gift to you," my father said. $230,000 to use however you see fit. For the business, for the farm, or for yourself personally. The offer hung in the air between us. 2 years ago, such financial validation would have meant everything. Now, having built my success without their support, I found it carried different significance. "I appreciate the gesture," I said after a moment's consideration. "But I don't need the money personally, and the business is doing well on its own merits." My father's expression fell slightly, the rejection of his attempt at equity clearly disappointing him. "However," I continued, "I do have a suggestion for how that money could make a difference in a way that would be meaningful to me." I explained my idea for a scholarship fund for young women pursuing degrees in sustainable agriculture and environmental science, particularly those facing family pressure to choose more traditional paths. "We could establish it in Grandma Eleanor's name," I suggested, "supporting students who, like me, see value in work that others might not immediately understand." The mention of my grandmother, whose early encouragement had been so crucial to my path, visibly moved my father. "She would have liked that very much," he said quietly. "She always believed education should open doors rather than narrow options." Over the following weeks, we worked together to establish the Eleanor Henderson Scholarship for Innovation in Sustainable Agriculture. The process of collaborating on something meaningful began to heal wounds that simple financial restitution could not have addressed, creating a shared purpose that acknowledged both the past hurt and the possibility of a different future. As the 1-year anniversary of our confrontation approached, I invited my family to a small gathering at the farm to celebrate both the launch of the scholarship fund and the demonstration growing field, which was now fully operational, providing data for our next generation of commercial systems. Standing together at the edge of the field, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and gold, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with winning approval and everything to do with standing firmly in my own truth, while allowing space for relationships to evolve. "I never imagined this," my father said, gesturing toward the thriving crops and monitoring stations. "When you first talked about environmental science, I pictured something abstract, theoretical, not this practical innovation with tangible results." "That was part of the problem," I replied, without bitterness. You couldn't value what you couldn't envision. He nodded thoughtfully. I measured success by the standards I understood. It limited my ability to see other forms of meaningful achievement. My mother slipped her arm through mine, a gesture of affection that would have seemed impossible during the years of strained disapproval. We're learning, she said simply. And they were in their own way and at their own pace. The relationship would never be uncomplicated, the years of dismissal and hurt, leaving marks that time might fade but never completely erase. Yet there was genuine growth on all sides, a willingness to expand definitions and expectations that made space for authentic connection. Jack had perhaps changed the most visibly, questioning the path he had followed so dutifully and finding satisfaction in activities and interests outside the narrow band of acceptable pursuits we had been raised with. He had recently joined the board of a nonprofit focused on urban food security, bringing his financial expertise to an organization aligned with values he had discovered through reconnecting with me. You know what's ironic, he said, as we walked back to the house together. Following the approved family plan was supposed to bring security and happiness, but I've never felt more fulfilled than since I started questioning it. Watching you build this life on your own terms gave me permission to examine my own choices. My business continued to thrive, expanding into new markets and developing increasingly sophisticated growing systems for various environments. The demonstration farm became a destination for agricultural students and sustainability professionals, a living showcase of innovation that attracted visitors from across the country. More meaningful than the professional success, however, was the inner peace that came from living authentically. The validation I had once desperately sought from my family had become secondary to the satisfaction of creating work aligned with my values. When their respect finally came, it was welcome, but no longer essential to my sense of worth. Standing in my fields as the day's last light painted the sky, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of rejection had been real and deep, but it had also been the catalyst for building a life entirely on my own terms, unconstrained by others' limited vision of what success should look like. Some wounds might never fully heal. Some patterns of family interaction might always require conscious effort to navigate, but the authentic path I had chosen had ultimately created the possibility for more genuine connections based on who we truly were, rather than who we were expected to be. The greatest lesson wasn't that I had proven my parents wrong or that success had vindicated my choices. It was that defining success on my own terms, standing firmly in my truth, even when it meant walking alone for a while, had created the foundation for a life of integrity and purpose that no external validation could provide. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own authentic path? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people we love most, but standing in your truth can lead to unexpected growth for everyone involved. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe for more real-life journeys, and share with someone who might need encouragement to follow their own path, even when it's not the one others have mapped out for them. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that success isn't measured by others' approval, but by the alignment between your actions and your deepest values.